Before we proceed any further with variables, I must teach you about the unspoken rules of variable naming. The Brotherhood and Sisterhood of Programmers would revoke my membership if I introduced any new members to our ranks without teaching them these sacred, unspoken rules. First rule, always use descriptive names. This means you must avoid variable names such as temp, or A, or B, or C, or D, etc., that I see all too often in novice programmers. The whole point of variables is to make your code easier to read. If your variable name doesn't advance this goal, you're doing it wrong. Second rule, don't be too descriptive. This may sound counter to rule number 1, but it isn't. I'm talking about variable names that are unnecessarily long and have too many words in them. You want your variable name to be just long enough to be clear and no longer. There's no maximum length that works in every scenario, but I'd say if you need more than 4 words in your variable name, you better be darn sure you know what you're doing. Third rule, follow the Camel case naming convention. This generally means starting your variable names with a lowercase letter, having no spaces, then capitalizing the first letter in every word thereafter. Also, generally, no numbers. Final rule, avoid common names across variables. This means having separate variables called lead1, lead2, lead3, and so on. It's impossible for someone to distinguish the purpose of lead1 versus lead2. Remember, the goal is to make your code easier to read, not harder. Please, please, please follow these 4 rules, as the Senior Programming Committee for Good and Descriptive Names of Variables is not a forgiving group of people. Now, a demonstration on the flexibility of variables. Pretend we have a custom object in our org called stock, used to represent shares owned of a company. Here's an example of how we can use variables to update our new stock record. First, of course, we create a new stock record in our code. Then, to calculate our stock's total purchase price, we'll create variables to represent how many shares of stock we're going to buy and what the price per stock is. Notice a few things. First, the variable names are both simple and descriptive. It would have been easy for me to name the purchase quantity variable to be something like num, or number, or even the letter n. But that could be confusing to someone reading our code. We can't assume other people will think the same way we do. Next, notice how we calculate the total purchase price. I'm multiplying 2 variables by each other, purchase quantity and stock price. Yes, we can use multiple variables in one code statement like this. Another thing to notice, we're multiplying an integer by a decimal. You can't always use variables of different data types together, but Apex really tries to make it as convenient as possible to do so. In this case, Apex does the logical thing and multiplies the 2 together with minimal data loss. The result will be of type decimal. This would not work if we were trying to do something silly like multiplying a Boolean by a decimal, however. And one more thing I want you to notice because I'm very proud of it. The equal signs on each line just line up so nicely. I'm very proud of that. In this last block, we start with a datetime variable. Remember, we usually have to use special methods to create date and datetime variables. In this case, we first create a datetime variable that's timestamped to the current time. Then we use another special method to actually translate a datetime into a date. This is important for you to know because you can translate most data types into other data types. Here we do it with datetime and date, but you can also do it from strings to decimals, integers to strings, dates to strings, and so on. This isn't necessarily the best way to do this. We could have actually saved a lot of time by using date.today instead, but I wanted to show you that data types can be translated. If there's nothing else you take from this slide, just remember that variables are super flexible And if there's anything special you ever want to do with them, you probably can.